It's been a very violent campaign, a very short campaign, only 3 weeks, but we've had a lot of violence. We've had more than 51 candidates or activists attacked during the campaign. There's a lot of tension. No one really knows what's going to come out of this.
Let's cross to France, where tomorrow's runoff election looks set to be hugely consequential for the country, with Marine Le Pen's anti-immigration party National Rally hoping to secure an overall majority and form the nation's first hard-right government since the Second World War. The Times' Paris correspondent is Adam Sage, and he joins me now. Adam, welcome back to the programme.
Hello.
Thanks for being with us. What's the mood like in France on both sides of that political divide then? Is there sort of jubilation and terror, or is there a bit more sort of trepidation all round?
I think trepidation and tension is the answer. It's been a very violent campaign, a very short campaign, only 3 weeks, but we've had a lot of violence. We've had more than 51 candidates or activists attacked during the campaign. There's a lot of tension. No one really knows what's going to come out of this election tomorrow, the second round, but either way, it's very probably France will find itself in uncharted territory.
And look, remind us what happened this week with like 200 candidates withdrew in an effort to stop National Rally winning. Explain to us the dynamic there, how that works, and indeed the history there, because I know they've done this sort of thing before.
Yes, that's right. I mean, France has a two-round electoral system. I mean, France is always twice as complicated as anywhere else on everything. Last week, in the first round, the National Rally won 33% of the vote, which was a very clear victory and an unprecedented score, which opened up the prospect of France having the first hard-right government since the liberation in the Second World War. Since then, because of the French system, which means that the first two candidates in any constituency go through to the second round, plus any other candidate who gets 12.5% of the electoral roll, there would have been 300 constituencies with at least three candidates in it. Now, in those constituencies, the National Rally was extremely well placed to win because it was going to get more votes than anyone else in the second round, and the second round is a first past the post, as in Britain. To stop it, there's been something like a couple of hundred or 130 odd left-wing candidates who have pulled out and said to their voters, please vote for Macron's centrist candidate to stop the National Rally. There have been about 80 Macron centrist candidates who have pulled out and said, please vote for the left to stop the National Rally. So the dynamics have changed considerably if you look at the polls, whereas at the end of the first round, it looked like the National Rally might get an absolute majority. Now, because of the withdrawals, and essentially it's an alliance between the left and the centre against the populist right, we're looking at a hung parliament, very probably, if the polls are anything like right, with about 200 to 220 seats for the National Rally, slightly less for the left, and 150 for Macron's camp, which is takes us into total confusion, very probably.
Before we come on to precisely what would happen there, am I right in thinking that this kind of dynamic with candidates pulling out, that's happened in the past in presidential elections in order to prevent far-right candidates sort of getting to the final two? Is that right?
Absolutely. Well, it's happened systematically, really, in France over the last 30 to 40 years, where they've had the Front Républicain, as they call it, the Republican Front, which is where all the parties gang up against the National Rally, essentially, to keep it out of power on the grounds that France can't turn back to the hard right, that is the child of the people who collaborated with Hitler, at least in the eyes of Macron and the left. The National Rally would have another take on that, of course. But yes, and it's worked systematically, really, for the last 30, 40 years. And very likely it will work again next time. But there is growing, if you go out and talk to voters, there's growing exasperation with it. There's growing disquiet with it. If you put voters on the ground, they say, well, this alliance is just being done so that the people in power can stay in power, so they can carry on in their well-paid jobs in the National Assembly and get their very excellent retirement pensions from the French MPs do, etc., etc. So it may work again this time. I mean, it certainly worked over the last 20 years, 30 years. I don't know if it's going to work forever.
Yeah.
And it does create in the eyes of many voters, a sort of democratic deficit at the heart of French life, really.
Yeah, sure. Well, look, I mean, so assuming then this goes ahead more or less as expected, and you end up with what's effectively a hung parliament, then what happens then? Who becomes prime minister?
Absolutely not the faintest idea. The Fifth Republic was created in 1958 by General Charles de Gaulle to avoid precisely this situation, because in the years since the Second World War, from 1945 to 1958, France had a very, very unstable political system where there were coalitions. I mean, it was Italian style thing, but coalitions are coming and going all the time, and governments coming and going. And this constitution was designed to prevent exactly that. Well, the problem is France could find itself back in that situation of the 1950s, where it was trying to get out of, back into an Italian-style situation of unstable governments and unstable coalitions. No one really knows. I mean, there is talk of a grand coalition, a sort of German-style coalition. Germany has the SPD, the Liberals, and the Greens, and there is talk of something similar to that here: the centrists, the moderate left, the moderate right, a few ecologists, something like that. But whereas Germany has a tradition of those sort of negotiations, let's say mature political discussions, French politics resembles a sort of primary school, really. And, please, sir, I don't want to sit next to him, sort of thing. So it's going to be very, very difficult to negotiate that sort of coalition. There's also talk of a technocratic government, and don't ask me to tell you what that means. I don't really know. But some people coming in from civil society, possibly unionists, possibly civil servants, possibly business figures, plus a few moderate politicians to oversee the country for the next year. The problem is that Macron can't dissolve Parliament and call another round of elections for another year. So France, if there is a hung Parliament, is stuck in the situation for at least 12 months.
Wow. And look, if the should the National Rally get it over the line, what is the? I mean, it's Jordan Bardella would be the prime minister. What is the potential for Macron being able to work with him? To what extent would he have to work with him? What would happen?
The French constitution is a very paradoxical thing, whereas where the president has an overall majority, he's very, very powerful. Where he doesn't, and he finds himself faced by the hostile parliament and therefore a hostile government, he loses swathes of his powers over domestic affairs. So Macron would have no choice but to work with Bardella. I mean, not really work with him, even on the domestic front. Bardella would set the legislative agenda, and Macron would have no choice but to sign the bills that Parliament passed. It's slightly more complicated in foreign affairs, where the constitution is ambiguous as to who controls it. In previous cohabitations is the word they use. The president and prime minister have come to some kind of arrangement that suits everyone. But in previous cohabitations, they broadly had the same foreign policies, the same foreign policy ideas. What would happen this time when you have a pro-European, broadly pro-Atlantic, pro-NATO president, and a Eurosceptic, a NATO skeptic, Atlantic skeptic, prime minister and party? I've no idea.
Yeah, wow. Look, before I let you go, Adam, what's been the reaction over there to Keir Starmer becoming prime minister here? Is there I mean, certainly among the the left and centre left, is there a degree of envy, or do they think we're just we have a chaos of a different sort?
There's been reaction from the socialists, certainly. Olivier Faure, who's the president or chairman of the Socialist Party, tweeted "God save the left," so they're very happy. To be honest, quite limited reaction, really. France is so obsessed with this completely unprecedented election that it is in at the moment that it has barely had time to look over the channel to Keir Starmer's victory. From the French point of view, it all seems pretty straightforward in England. In Britain, we've got a government that was not doing so well. We've got rid of it. We've got one to see if it will do better. I mean, that seems like a pretty good solution viewed from France.
Yeah, no, it makes you count your blessings, doesn't it? Thank you very much indeed, Adam Sage. That's Adam Sage there in Paris. Great pleasure to speak to you as always. And you can read more from Adam in thetimes.com with a digital subscription, or of course frequently in the newspaper.